Okay, so let's start with maybe I thought maybe not to do much elaborate, prayers and stuff at the beginning and end until we do the module and practice. But if you like, and you're already familiar with, you can visualize the refuge field in front. You can visualize Shakyamuni Buddha in front, or your own teachers briefly, or anything that symbolizes the highest ideals that you aspire to. And then generate positive motivation. Think of all your reasons, short and long-term reasons for participating in this course, and especially try to connect it to bringing about the welfare of oneself and the world and all sentient beings. And then, without using words, just from your heart, you can, if you like, you can take refuge, generate the attitude of refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, or just request for inspiration from whatever objects of faith you turn to. Okay, so that we can begin. Okay, so like I was saying to the early crowd, I made PowerPoints for this session. Finally, largely because last time when I did the module, what was it, on meditation, especially when I read the self-assessments, everyone did very, very well on the self-assessments in general, but there are a couple kind of more like definitions I was sort of hoping people would remember. I think the ones most people struggled with was like, what is excitement versus laxity, and mindfulness versus introspection. There's a little bit technical things, but I explained very thoroughly, I remember, but somehow it didn't stick for a lot of us. So I was thinking maybe the reason part of that was because I didn't have it in writing, where you can see it. So I wanted to put everything, all the main points that especially the ones I'm going to test you on at the end, in writing, so you can see it this time. So I made PowerPoint slides. And also just it's nice to be able to share some quotes and, be able to see the outlines and stuff like that. Yeah, so I'll be using those a lot this session, beginning now. So I'll go straight to that, and then, yeah, and you can still see me. Okay, so this is module 4, death and rebirth. So first of all, I just need to explain that a little bit, because some of you who have looked at the overview of this course, Discovering Buddhism, might have been expecting to see, depending upon a spiritual teacher, come next, because that's what actually comes next in the course. But Venerable Namjung and I decided to switch the order around, largely because depending upon a spiritual teacher is really more relevant for people who are like dedicated Buddhists. But this is an introduction to Buddhism course. So we thought it's a little bit better to put it later. Also, it's a little bit difficult topic, and also the more you're familiar with like many aspects of Buddhist teachings, then the more, depending upon a spiritual teacher, makes sense and is kind of meaningful to you. So anyway, I think it's better we put it later. Whereas death and rebirth, so topic this module is on, is very accessible, very relevant to everyone, because it's something we all experience, or will experience, have experienced. And it doesn't, there's nothing very religious about it, really. Yeah, and also it's just very useful, and it flows naturally with the other topics. So far, we've covered mind and its potential. It's the first module. The second module was how to meditate, which I did. And then the module you just did with Venerable Namjung was presenting the path, which is, includes a lot of stuff that you probably discovered. It's a very vast topic. I mean, because it covers the whole path. So now we're on death and rebirth, which you'll be happy to know is a lot more simple, and there's a lot less points, a lot less material in a way. It's more kind of homogeneous well-defined topic. But there are a lot of required readings. It's a caveat for this. I think the required readings, PDF is 120 pages. And then on top of that, there's the Mogul Rinpoche's Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand is, I don't know, probably 30 pages. And then there's also a whole book by His Holiness Dalai Lama, Advice for Dying and Living a Better Life, which is, it's a very easy read. It's very profound, but it's, another 100 pages or so. So there's a lot of reading this topic. Okay, so death and rebirth is this topic. It's the fourth. So then I wanted to locate it within the lamrim. Where does it fit in the lamrim? Because you just went over the whole path, right? So, okay, okay, so we can kind of divide up the lamrim into 4 main sections, right? There's 2 preliminary topics, and I'll go through each of these in just a second, but there's 2 preliminary topics, which is relying on a spiritual teacher and the precious human rebirth. And then there's 4 topics of the path shared with beings of the small scope, right, which I'll go through. And then there's the topics of the path shared with beings of the middle scope, and then topics of the path shared with beings of the great scope. So I hope I'm copying, especially in the small scope, middle scope, great scope, I hope I'm copying the language of, well, I hope Venerable Namjung and I are using the same language, but there's sometimes slightly different terms for those. Okay, so the main thing is there's 2 preliminary topics, and then there's the 3 scopes, the small scope, middle scope, and great scope. All right, so then 2 preliminary topics are correctly relying upon a spiritual teacher, which we're going to put later. It's taught first at the beginning of the lamrim, probably because the lamrim was originally taught to a group of Buddhists, right? So to them, that makes sense right at the beginning. But to Westerners who are just interested in Buddhism at the beginning, it's kind of doesn't make sense to put that first. And then precious human rebirth, which you should have touched upon a little bit in the last module. And then, okay, 4 topics of the path shared with beings of the small scope. So the first here is what we're going to talk about, impermanence and death. Here, this module, they just throw in rebirth. So, because that's also part of the same, kind of process. So first, just maybe I should qualify here. So why are these topics, well, maybe I'll ask you all, since you all just studied the presenting the whole path. So what's the main point? Why are there these topics? Impermanence and death, suffering of lower realms, refuge in the 3 jewels, and karma. Why are these topics taught in as the path shared with beings of the small scope, as opposed to like bodhicitta, the 3 higher trainings, the 4 noble truths? What's the main point of meditating on these 4 topics in this at the beginning of the path here? Anybody want to? Eve?
Okay, so the small scope's aspirations are to have a higher rebirth. So they want to avoid the 3 lower realms. So they need to know about the topics that would reduce them from human, and stay in the God realm or the human realm in the following rebirths.
Yeah, definitely. That's half of the answer, but there's another half. Could say, roughly. Anybody else want to try?
Venerable,
please.
I'm thinking maybe because they serve as a base, you have to have those down first before you can get to the middle scope and the greater scope. So it's a base.
Definitely, yeah. It's a base, but kind of how is it a base? Like, because think about like the middle scope, I'll kind of help you a little bit. Like the middle scope is thinking about, and related to what Eve said, about getting free from all of samsara, right? Whereas, like Eve said, the small scope is about being free from the suffering of the lower realms, like not taking rebirth in the lower realms and taking rebirth in the upper realms. Whereas the middle scope, so that is a base for then the middle scope, trying to be free from all of the suffering of samsara. And then the great scope, trying to free all sentient beings from all of the suffering of samsara. But I guess the other half, I was thinking the other half of the why these topics in terms of the middle scope is because what are we ordinarily attached to that we have to give up? This life, like
Yeah,
the
like-
pleasures of this life. Yeah. So that's why impermanence is right at the beginning, because the Buddha is pointing out that all the pleasures of this life that we're attached to, it's not going to last, right? We're going to die and be separated from all of that. So we need to start thinking beyond just this life, right? Because there's a future coming beyond that. We need to start preparing. So that's kind of the other half of the question. Yeah, half of the answer. Half the small scope. In one way, it's geared towards achieving happiness in future lives, but that depends upon reducing attachment and obsession with obsessive concern with just this life. Okay. So yeah, so then how do we do that? First, impermanence and death, it cuts. It's kind of like one of the best antidotes to attachment. Is thinking about impermanence and death. Whenever we're attached to a person, status, possessions, any kind of pleasures, it helps. You can see, you can experiment in your own time, but it definitely helps to think about, well, I'm going to die and be separated from this eventually. So even though I can enjoy it now, there's no problem with that. Don't invest all my hopes in, this relationship or this possession or even in this body, because it's changing moment by moment and it's going to come to an end, definitely. Okay, so first, impermanence and death to help us start turning away from attachment to this life. And then we start thinking about, well, what's going to happen after we die? What are the different possibilities? Either we're going to take rebirth in upper realm as a deva or a human being, in a happy existence, or we might take rebirth in a lower realm, in a hell realm, or as an animal, a hungry ghost. So then we're instructed to think about, well, what if we take rebirth in hell or as a hungry ghost, as an animal? What would that be like? And then we think about all the sufferings in those states, and then thereby generate sort of wise caution, like not, realizing how miserable that would be, then generate a kind of aversion or caution, wishing to not take rebirth in the lower realms. So that's by thinking about the suffering in the lower realms. And then thinking about the possibility of falling into that suffering. Then at this point, they teach refuge in the three jewels. But again, that's a little problematic if you don't already have faith in the three jewels. But we can start thinking about, well, how do the three jewels protect us from suffering in the lower realm? The main way is by teaching about karma, how karma works, right? That virtuous actions give rise to happy, pleasant results and experiences. Non-virtuous actions, harmful actions, produce for oneself, for the actor, suffering results and experience. So it's mainly by teaching that that the Buddha protects us from the suffering of the lower realms, and then it's up to us to put into practice that teaching on karma. So those are the four topics of the small scope, and that's where impermanence and death fits. I'll just briefly touch upon the other two scopes just as a review for you, since you just studied that. So then there's the topics of the path shared with beings of the middle scope, right? So this is beings whose main aspiration is to be free from all of the suffering of samsara. So for them, and this is just very rough outline, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, so the truth of suffering, the causes of suffering, truth of cessation, and truth of the path. The way that's presented in the lamrim, in the middle scope, is actually not so clearly like that. It's the middle scope begins with looking at all the different sufferings of samsara, which is all part of the first truth, the truth of suffering. But there's, if you remember, I'm not sure you went over in last module, but there are like the 8 sufferings, the 6 sufferings, the 3 sufferings of samsara, and then next is, there's a lot of suffering we talk about in Buddhism, right? Because it makes us happy. And then And then the causes of suffering, right? The truth of the cause of suffering. We talk about all the afflictive emotions. Why do we suffer? Because of karma, which was already covered, and then the afflictive emotions like attachment, anger, jealousy, arrogant pride, and then the root of those, ignorance, grasping at an inherently existent self. So it talks about that in the middle scope, and then kind of those together are spoken about described in a slightly different way, more like exactly what's the process by which we create karma, then the karma is activated, then we take rebirth, and then we create more karma. That whole process is talked about in 12 links, dependent arising. And then how do we escape from all of that is by means of the 3 higher trainings. The training of higher morality, training of higher concentration, and the training of higher wisdom. Right? So morality, based on morality, we have a peaceful mind, we can generate good concentration, the second one. Then based on having a very concentrated, focused attention, we can deepen our wisdom, especially the wisdom which cuts the root of samsara. So those are roughly the 3 main topics of the middle scope: the 4 noble truths, the 12 links of dependent arising, and the 3 higher trainings. Okay, and then finally the great scope, our favorite. So it begins with bodhicitta, the aspiration to become fully enlightened in order to be of the greatest benefit to all sentient beings. And then having generated that attitude, we engage in the 6 perfections. So that's the perfection. Okay, I'll ask you guys now. I'm talking enough already. What are the 6 perfections? Did you all cover this in the the presenting the path module? I wonder. I don't know. Do you remember? Okay, we can together. Come on. There's how many of us here? We can all get it together, I think. Okay, Mary.
Morality, concentration, wisdom, ethics.
Ethics and morality is the same thing.
Oh,
Okay, yeah. Wisdom and concentration are the last 2. And morality is the second. Generosity is the first. That's how many? 4 already, I think. Isn't it ethics? What did we get already? Let's go from the beginning. We did generosity, morality, and then we did the last 2, concentration and wisdom. So we're missing 2 in the middle.
Patience and joyous effort.
Patience. And patience and joyful effort. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, see, we got it. See, that's joyful effort in practice right there. So yeah, so there's just a review. There's first generosity, because it's easiest to do, right? Then slightly more difficult is to practice pure morality. Then even much more difficult is to practice patience, right? And then, so those are anyway, those are the 3 primarily taught for lay devotees. It's explained in some texts. It's more like the monastics who are responsible for generating concentration and wisdom traditionally in traditional ancient India. And then and joyful effort is for everybody. So okay, so there's generosity, pure morality, then patience, and then joyful effort is the 4th, and meditative concentration and wisdom is the 6th. So those are that's the main body of the great scope. And there's especially Lama Tsongkhapa puts a lot of emphasis on the last 2, generating concentration and wisdom. In his great treatise on the stages of the path, at least half or more of the text is about the last 2 of the 6 perfections. And then just a small topic at the end is the 4 ways of gathering disciples. So that means once you're actually, kind of a competent bodhisattva, then how do you work actually to benefit others? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that's just kind of an aside, a review. So let's get back to our main topic for today: impermanence, death, and rebirth in 6 sessions. Yeah. So we're going to cover this module in 6 sessions. Right. So I put impermanence and death there because that's in the lamrim. The topic is usually called impermanence and death, right? But the topic of this module in the FPMT program is called death and rebirth. But it all goes together. So I just put them all in the title here: impermanence, death, and rebirth in 6 sessions. So whatever we can cover in 6 sessions, that's what we'll cover. But so I just wanted to show you my sort of plan for this module. So we have 2 weeks now, and then we have Christmas and New Year's break, and then we have 4 sessions after that. Okay, so we'll go to the end of January. So we have December and January. Okay, so this is what we'll cover. So this session today, so I better check my time because I'm totally behind. Why meditate on death, and what is death? Then the advantages. So that's just kind of an introductory session, and then the next 3 are the real main outlines in the lamrim. And the advantages of thinking about death and the disadvantages of not thinking about death. Right, that's the first main heading. And then the actual way to remember death is the 9-part or the 9-point meditation on death. So that's the main kind of meditation way to meditate on death. It's the 9-point meditation on death. And then how we die, like the process by which we die, focusing on the 8 stages of absorption at the time of death. So that's kind of describing how our different levels of our consciousness deteriorate as we die, and then the clear light mind of death becomes manifest. And that's an incredible opportunity to meditate, to purify obscurations and generate, deepen wisdom and other qualities. And then how we take rebirth through the force of karma, so forth. And then the final session is kind of a review session, but how to our personal practice, how to prepare for death, and then how to help other people, others who are dying, family members or friends or so forth. How to help other people in the process of dying. So that's the 6 sessions we'll go through. Yeah. So then let's start here, I think. Okay, so session 1, why meditate on death and what is it? Okay. So I like this is one of my favorite quotes by the Buddha in relation to death, impermanence. He says, of all the footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all mindfulness meditations, or of all forms of mindfulness or forms of meditation, that on death is supreme. So this is spoken in a sutra by the Buddha. It's actually not spoken by the Buddha in that sutra, it's spoken by someone else. But it's spoken, we would say it's spoken through Buddha's blessing, that person said that. So you can kind of consider it the word of the Buddha. And this is I just found this online, but it's apparently from a book by Glenn Mullen called Living in the Face of Death, which I'm not familiar with. And it's from the sutra called Entering into Parinirvana. It's a famous Mahayana sutra. But let's discuss that quote. Like, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. So first, that's an analogy, right? What does it mean? It means, like, imagine you're in a jungle, like in South India here, and maybe you're thirsty, you don't know where you are, you're lost, and you're running out of water, or don't know how to get to the edge of the jungle, and you need to follow something's tracks. When we're just wandering through the jungle with not following anything's tracks, no human tracks, no animal tracks, then yeah, we're not sure we're going to be going anywhere, like, at all, right? So it's always helpful when we're in the wilderness to follow tracks of some other creature. So imagine if we're in a jungle and we're not familiar with the other animals there, the easiest tracks are going to be which ones? The
The
elephant tracks.
biggest.
Yeah, because they're huge, right? There actually are elephant tracks here. You can easily find they're, like this big around, like twice the size of your face. They're huge and deep. You can't miss them. So of course the Buddha's not teaching us how to, make our way through the forest. Literally, he's teaching us how to make our way through the forest of samsara and find our way out, right, and get to the other side. So similarly, of all mindfulness meditations, that on death is supreme. So how can we, affix that, use that analogy to understand what Buddha is saying? Basically, it comes back to attachment, like I was saying earlier. Like, why are we in samsara still? Like, I mean, just for now, just take for granted that there is past and future lives. I know that might be a big leap of faith for someone. We can discuss that later, but take it, for granted. Like, we've taken rebirth many times. We've had, many families, many jobs, many houses. We've traveled many places already. We've had, as much wealth as there is. We've suffered, as many tragedies as there are to suffer. Kind of, we've seen it all in samsara from life to life, and yet we're still here, right? And we're still not convinced, like, we don't want to be here. Actually, we're still quite enamored with all the, the glittery things, the nice things in samsara. So it's kind of like the Buddha saying, well, yeah, basically we're in samsara because of attachment. We're placing on, and attachment means we place unrealistic expectations on getting lasting happiness and well-being from things that cannot give it to us, right? From other people, from clothes and food and entertainment, from wealth, from power, from reputation. We invest so much hope that, if only I can be more famous, if I can have more friends, if I can have more money, if I can have more, power, so that I have total autonomy and sovereignty over, everything. I can do whatever I want to do. We place so much hope in all these different kind of things, which actually don't give us lasting pleasure. Especially, we hope that happiness, somehow we can manipulate other people or the environment we live in, so that happiness will just kind of fall down upon us like rain, like all the time, without looking within. The ultimate source of happiness is within our own mind. But it's difficult to do that, and difficult to, even if we know that, it's difficult to accomplish. But the Buddha is saying, basically, like, it's impermanence and death which cuts through all this attachment with, especially sense pleasures, but all the pleasures of this life. When we think about, so I mean, think about how much time we spend being kind of concerned with our body, with our appearance, our physical appearance, our hair, our clothes, our skin, our face, our build, our weight, our blood pressure, all the different aspects of our physical health. And as a society, think how much we do that. We don't need to show this. How much attention as a society, maybe not as an individual personally, but as a society, how much attention we give to our body. But then think about that in light of the fact that we're going to be separated from this body completely. We're going to die. It totally changes the way we look at it. Of course, it's important to have good physical health. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Because especially if we're doing something constructive with our lives, we want to live a long life. And you can see when you're meditating, if you're physically uncomfortable, you can't focus your mind. So it's not that physical health is not important, but the question is kind of, how important is it? How central should it be to our kind of concern and what we value? So if we think about the fact that every moment we're aging, eventually we're definitely going to die. When we're going to die, it's not certain at all. Then it puts the whole physical health thing in a very different light, for example. And then the same is true with money. We might feel like we don't have much money, but then thinking, well, we could die tomorrow. Then what's the benefit of having a lot of money? And the same with fame, or our personal relationships with family and friends is a little more tricky, right? Because that's something much more meaningful, obviously, and it's something that actually can help us at the time of death. I mean, if we feel like supported and loved by our friends and family around us, that does help a lot at the time of death. It's not like possessions that we're just separated from and they don't do anything for us. But a danger at the time of death is being too attached to people such that we can't let go. That can become a huge source of suffering, right? If we're so attached to people, meaning we have an unrealistic expectation that only by remaining together with my parents or my siblings or my children or my friends, then I can be happy. If I'm separated from them, I cannot be happy. I'll be totally lost, right? If we have that kind of view, that causes a lot of suffering for us, a lot of suffering for others. And it's also, I mean, it's a false view, right? But we'll come back to that. I mean, that's a very complicated one, quite a difficult one. We'll come back to it. But for now, trying to look at this analogy, like, why is the Buddha saying of all the footprints, the elephant is the best? It's really, I mean, another way to summarize it is like this. It's because, well, as long as we're our main focus of our attention and energy is just chasing after pleasures and temporary, like short-lasting kind of happiness of this life, then we never think about future lives, right? So we don't make any preparation for future lives. So it's none of our actions become a Dharma practice in that way. They don't become something that prepares us for future lives intentionally. I mean, if we're a good person, just a fundamentally, honest, kind, generous, altruistic person, of course, that's all good preparation for future lives. It's habituating our mind, to virtuous states, and it's going to help us in the future, whether we believe in, future lives or not. It doesn't matter. But but I think you can see, and I mean, I'd be interested to hear about your comments or questions, but I think you can see how if we do think about, the fact of our ultimate demise, the fact of our death, just think about it in relation to a personal relationship with one, like your parent, a father or mother or a sibling. We easily focus on, petty things about which we disagree and we bicker about, and, we can even go on, bickering and arguing and disagreeing about for many, many, many years. But then if we're nearing death or they're nearing death, those things all seem they seem as trivial as they actually are, which we just didn't see before, right? They seem so much more, they seem kind of insignificant in relation to the fact that we're able to share that relationship with the person at all, that we're able to have some time together at all, that we fundamentally care about each other, more, basic, below just these superficial disagreements. So think about, in terms of a relationship with, someone is it true that when you think about your own impending demise, their impending demise, doesn't it help to bring out what's more important about that relationship, about the way you relate to that person? I mean, none of us want to die with, regret, or not having forgiven a person who's apologized, or not having asked forgiveness for something that we did wrong, right? So I think thinking about that, that helps us to hone in or highlight or see very clearly, like, what are those things in life that are really important? Helps us to appreciate, like, just life. I mean, as if there was no death, it's kind of like, if there was no nighttime, then there would be no sunrise and no sunset. Daytime, the beauty of light would be meaningless, because that's all there would ever be, right? If it was just light, like all the time, kind of just always daylight, then, it wouldn't just the kind of miracle of the sun rising in the morning and illuminating things. It wouldn't exist, right? Because the sun would have never set ever. So, it's like we can appreciate things by contrast. We appreciate the beauty of the day because there is a night. We appreciate the beauty of night because there's a day. Some things are good only in contrast to other things that are really bad. Health, we can see in our own experience, we only appreciate really having good health when we're sick. If we never got sick, we would just take it for granted that, I have a lot of energy, I can sleep, I can eat food and enjoy it. If that's all we ever experienced, then we would never really appreciate it, because It's never taken away. You'd appreciate something when it's taken away. Anyway, I shouldn't go on talking about that quote for hours and hours because we'll run out of time. But yeah. But something like that, yeah. I thought hopefully that'll become more clear. Like, why is it important to meditate on death and impermanence through this module? And then before I go on to the next quote, I want to just talk about a little bit about what. Well, first of all, I wanted to say I know this topic can be quite maybe challenging for some people. It's something I think sometimes I forget because I've been in the Buddhist sort of spheres for so long. Maybe also because when I was a young person, I kind of felt no, I don't know, hesitancy thinking about or talking about death. But I know, in common society, it's not something we usually talk about, especially, with loved ones. Even I have a hard time talking about death with my parents, at least about their death. They're quite elderly. But so I know, just as kind of warning, I know for some people, and you have to remind me of this maybe sometimes, but for some people it could be quite, bring up a lot of strong feelings, be sort of threatening, be a little scary, and that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having any of those kind of reactions. I mean, that's just natural. And I know from, we've all had people who are dear to us die, and that's one of the most, one of the most tragic things we experience in life, right? Is being separated by people who are close to us that way. So, of course, I mean, all those emotions will come up, and but the Buddhist kind of approach is very much just to not look away from anything, to look at all of that directly as it is and accept it and think about it, right? And use that to develop as a person, to develop compassion, to develop, acceptance, and to help us just think more clearly about, well, how do we want to use our life? What kind of person do we want to be? And yeah, so I think it is very wise. It's foolish to look away from difficult challenges that inevitably are coming, right? On one hand, it's foolish just to worry about, really bad things that might happen to us, but not likely. That's kind of not so smart. But if there's something that's going to be really difficult, we're going to have to go through, that we're definitely going to have to go through, it'd be foolish not to think about it, right? So that's what, because death is something that's going to happen to all of us. As soon as we're born, inevitably we're going to die. That's the only thing that's certain to happen to us, is that we're going to die. So it's just a natural part of life, which I think, yeah, as a society, I think if we don't make that part of our, our conversation and our awareness, it really makes life much more shallow than it is. I mean, death really shows us how profound life is. So then, well, what is death? Is the question the main question I want to address this session. And in a little bit of a technical way first, but it helps kind of inform everything else we'll do it in this module. But just to give you a basic idea, is basically now as a person, what are we made up of? Like, what are we? We have a body, obviously, which you can all see, and we have a mind, right? And they're together very much, right? So when we touch part of our body, we have a sensation. We can feel something. That's our mind is experiencing it. If we were just a corpse, then people could touch our body all we want. We're not going to feel anything because there's no mind there, right? So what's the difference between a living, a human body and a corpse? Is the presence of a mind or not a mind. So what are we fundamentally? We're a body, and then consciousness conjoined, mind or consciousness conjoined with that body, and they interact very intimately. So what is death is when the two are separated, right? When the mind leaves the body. That's what death is, basically. And then, well, what is birth is when a stream of consciousness, a mind, is conjoined with the cells that become our body, right? The first two cells are sperm and ovum of our parents at the time of conception, right? So there's those cells, the time of conception, and they're joined, a stream of consciousness enters those, conjoins with them, and then they grow into embryo and then child and then an adult, so forth. So that's birth, is that conjunction of a stream of consciousness with the body, and then death is the separation of the stream of consciousness, or the continuum of a person is another way to say, from the body. They separate. Yeah. So I think I have another quote here. Okay. Oh yeah, okay, let's just look at this one real quick. This is from the Garland of Birth Stories, or the Jataka Tales. Though you hold fast, you cannot stay. What benefit is there in being frightened and scared of what cannot be changed? So although we cling to this life, we cling to our body, we cling to our possessions, we cling to our friends, our name, our reputation. Though we hold fast to all those things of this life, we cannot stay. We're definitely going to die and go on from this life. Yeah, I mean, clinging to all the appearance of this life would be like, it'd be kind of like, being in a dream. In a dream, you have a dream body, a dream world, dream experiences, and knowing it's a dream, and yet clinging to it not ending, right? So like all the appearances of this life are very much like a dream. It's like the dream begins the time we're born, the dream ends the time we die. But of course, it's more tangible, more solid than a dream, but still, it's like a dream and not, it's just an appearance. It's just a set of appearances that have arisen, they play out, and then inevitably they'll end, and we'll enter a totally different world. They die. So though you hold fast, you cannot stay. What benefit is there in being frightened and scared of what cannot be changed, right? So death is inevitable, it's going to come. What benefit is there to be frightened and scared about it, to ignore it, to look away from it, and not consider the fact, right? Oops. Sorry. So it's something that we can actually, not only we should look at, but we can, we can overcome a lot of fear and suffering by thinking about and becoming comfortable with the fact of death. And then when we deeply realize actually what happens during death, we can see it as an incredible opportunity for growth and transformation. Death provides an incredible opportunity for, having some of the most probably deep, insightful, powerful experiences we can ever have, up to enlightenment. I mean, actually, the experience of death actually provides a huge window for actually achieving enlightenment. Okay. And then another quote also, this is from the 400 stanzas by Aryadeva. Those who think with certainty, I will die, give up fear. Therefore, how could they fear even the Lord of Death? So those who think repeatedly, reflect again and again on the fact that I will die, then they lead their lives in such a way, especially they meditate in such a way that they overcome fear, even the fear of death. So death becomes something that's not a threat, not threatening to them. Okay, so here I wanted to look at actually a bunch of definitions. I should have come to this earlier, but so you have a little bit more energy, because these are a little difficult definitions, but we can come back to them. So when we ask what is death, right? There's basically, we should think about at least these four, maybe the fifth one also. First of all, where's my, oh yeah, here it is, okay. First of all, what is a person, right? Because it's a person who dies. So what is a person? Oh, sorry. And then what is birth? And then what's aging? And then what's death? And then what is samsara? Actually, that definition is not supposed to be there. So I want to just speak briefly about these five. So first of all, a person. So again, there's kind of a technical definition, which I've written here, but I'll give a more kind of user-friendly description. But technical definition of a person is basically like this. Person is a being imputed in dependence upon its aggregates, right? 5. You can impute a person on 5 aggregates or from some among those 5 aggregates. Okay. So again, being is synonymous with person, right? So in that way, it's not a really good definition because I think you're not supposed to use synonyms in definitions so much. It means the same thing, so it doesn't help that much. But so a person is a being who is imputed upon independence upon its aggregates. So what are our aggregates? Mainly, you can divide into 2, right? There's our body and our mind. But you can subdivide into 5, right? So the body is the first, and then the last 4, the other 4 or 5 are, anyway, it's like this: feelings. There's a second, there's feelings, and then discrimination. We think this is this is that. Then compositional factors is sort of a catch-all miscellaneous category for all other kinds of consciousness. And then main minds, consciousness or main minds. So we have a body, then we have feelings, pleasure and pain. Then we have discriminations, different thoughts. So this is a computer, this is a hand, this is light, this is food, this is friend, this is enemy. All kinds of discriminations. We think about things. So there's the body, feelings, discrimination. Compositional factors is like all the other kind of, love, compassion, forgetfulness, distraction, attachment, all the other sort of mental factors, they're called aspects of our mind. And then there's main minds, especially our mental consciousness. And then our 5 sense powers, but mainly the mental consciousness. So in short, the aggregates is all the constituents of us as a person. We have a body and all these different parts of our mind. So what this definition is saying is that the person is not the body. We are not our body. Person is not their mind. We are not our mind. So the person is something that's imputed upon those. In dependence upon the body and mind, we label I, person. Right? So that's what the person is this thing which is imputed upon, in dependence upon this aggregation of a body and a mind. So that's what's born. The person is the thing that's born. Person is the thing that ages. Person is the thing that dies. But thinking about death is a very powerful way to think about, what am I as a person? So, but then these terms, self, I, and person, are 4 terms. Self, I, person, and being are synonymous. So I remember when I first learned this here at Sarah, I was quite shocked because I thought, we always say there is no self, there is no I as Buddhists. But then they're saying definitely there's a person. Otherwise, there would be no Buddhists. And being and person are synonymous, fine. But what do they mean? There's a self, and there's an I, and those are synonymous. So this helps to clarify that actually, when in Buddhism, when we say there's no self, we're not refuting any self whatsoever. We're refuting a specific kind of self, the self existing in a particular way, which it doesn't exist, right, as a permanent thing or an independent, inherently existent thing. So there is a person, there is a self, there is an I. When we say there's no self, we're refuting something more specific than just self in general. Okay, so that's that definition. And then the next one, birth. The ripened aggregates existing at the time immediately after a person is conjoined with a birth existence by the force of karma and afflictive emotions. All right, so, okay, so first of all, birth is when basically, so through the force of karma and afflictive emotions, like mainly attachment or anger, we're thrown, like, imagine we die from one life. So our stream of consciousness, our continuum as a person, we're separated from the body of a past life. We go through a bardo state, between state. And then our karma throws us into, let's just say, life as a human being again. So by the force of karma and afflictive emotions, the continuum of the person, especially the mental consciousness, is conjoined with the sperm and egg, right, of our parents at the time of conception. And so that moment of when the continuum of the person is conjoined with the body of a particular life is called birth existence. It only lasts for one moment. And that's birth. That's when birth happens. That is birth. So the ripened aggregates. So the ripened aggregates means like our body of this life, and then the feelings, the thoughts that go with, the body of this life. Why are they called ripened aggregates? Because they were thrown by karma, right? They are the result of karma, and that karma has ripened as this kind of body, and the feelings, the kind of feelings that go with this kind of body, the kind of thoughts, discriminations that go with this kind of body, and the kind of awareness or consciousness that goes with this kind of life. Like as a human being, all our body and mind, we have the body and mind of a human being instead of, of a cat or of a fish or of, a ghost or something. So all of the constituents of our body and mind are the result of our karma, which threw us into this human rebirth. So that's why these aggregates are called ripened aggregates. They're the ripened result of certain kind of karma. So birth is the ripened aggregates existing at the time immediately after a person is conjoined with a birth existence. Yeah, immediately, I don't know, after or at the time with is probably more accurate. I don't have the Tibetan right with me now, but basically think like this. So like I explained already, just to summarize then, at the time when a person's continuum has come from a past life, a bardo, and then conjoins with the particular ripened aggregates, the body and mind of that particular life, then that is birth. It only lasts for one moment. And then from the very next moment is aging, right? So aging doesn't only start like when you're over 50 or something. It starts like from the second after you're born. The transformation of the ripened aggregates. So it's a kind of a transformation of the ripened aggregates that exists from the second moment after birth existence until just before death existence is established. So these terms, birth existence and death existence, is a little confusing, and there's not a really good way to translate it into English, but there's kind of four types of existence that I'll just mention now. So there's birth existence. It only is at the moment of birth. And then it's called manifest existence, which is all the time from birth until death. So like what we're experiencing now is, so you can translate as manifest existence. And then there's death existence. And then there's bardo existence. Those four. Birth existence. I think in the maybe Kagyu Nyingma tradition, they're called the four bardos. But here in the they call the four existences. So there's birth, then manifest existence, or you can say kind of like life, and then death existence, and then the bardo existence. So the point is saying there are four different kinds of existence, right? We exist during all of those. So aging is this transformation of the aggregates that exists from the second moment after birth until just before death is established. And then finally, we'll leave it here, I think. Death. The separation. So what is death? Separation of a person's continuum from the ripened aggregates belonging to a particular life. Right. So think about for oneself. What does our death mean? So now, as a person, we have a continuum, or we're existing moment to moment. We have an experience, and an experience which is conjoined with and dependent upon and mixed with having this particular human body, this particular human way of perceiving the world, and all the feelings and thoughts that go with that, right? So what does death mean? It means when our continuum is separated from this body and separated from the kind of that human karmic experience which we have now, which is really hard to imagine, right? Because that's all we've known so far. And I mean, unless we have memories of our past lives, it's like we can't remember being a dog or a horse or a ghost or a hell being or something. And probably the reason we can't, I mean, a big argument for people who deny past and future lives is, well, if we had past lives, we should be able to remember them. Just like if we had, just like we had past dinner parties or birthday parties, we can remember them, right? Well, first of all, we can't remember all the past birthday parties and dinner parties anyway, because the boring ones we just forget because we don't care. Or maybe, really, really traumatic ones, it's just too painful. So we block out, that happens in trauma. But I think with the case of past lives, it's actually, well, why don't we remember past rebirths? It's probably because they're so totally radically different from our experience now that it just doesn't fit in with our experience now. But there are people who remember also, a few, some. And actually, it said if we purify our minds enough and generate good enough concentration, so we can see subtle aspects of our mind clearly enough, all the memories from all our past lives are there in our continuum, and we can access and see. Okay, we should stop. I should stop there. Well, I'll just read, since there's just one definition left, I'll just read that one. So samsara, what is samsara? This is more relevant later in the course, but I thought to mention it with all the other definitions. It's the continuum of repeatedly taking rebirth helplessly through the force of karma and afflictive emotions. All right, so you can see how it fits. We just went over what is the person, what is birth, what is aging, what is death. So it's basically taking rebirth and dying again and again and again through the force of karma, right? We create karma, not intentionally, we just create it. And then as we die, it's different karmas ripen and they throw us into rebirth without us having control over what kind of rebirth we take, right? So it's that process of taking rebirth, creating karma as we die, being driven by that karma into another rebirth. And then that next rebirth, again, creating different kinds of karma, and again, dying, again, it's that continuum of repeatedly taking rebirth helplessly. So not by our own power, but through the force of karma and afflictive emotions. That's what samsara is. So we are that continuum. It's not like samsara is a place, like a room, and we're in it. Although we speak about it like that a lot, but that's more metaphorical. In the real actual terms, like samsara is us. It's the kind of existence we're in. It's like it's a continuum of our body and mind, and the way, and the continuum of us as a person, and the way it is under the power of karma and afflictive emotions and takes rebirth. Okay, all right, I'm almost at the end. So I'll just jump out of that mode, but there's just one quote left. I'll read that one, then stop. So this is like a dedication. And this is actually, hold on, I'll do this again. Actually, for the required reading for this course is this book by the Dalai Lama, Advice for Dying and Living a Better Life, which is one of the best, I think it's the best book I've ever read on death. It's an excellent book. And it goes from very simple advice to incredibly profound description of death according to a highest yoga tantra. Even I was really shocked when I read it the first time, like to see all the things that usually to hear an explanation of, you have to have received an initiation and take a lot of vows and commitments. But His Holiness just explains very openly there all these very subtle things about the mind and human potential and process of death and rebirth. But the basis of that book is a prayer by Panchen Chökyi Gyaltsen, who's the first Panchen Lama, is the author of, probably most famously, the author of the Lama Chopa kind of ritual. But he's an incredible, profound Tibetan scholar and incredible meditator, Buddhist master. So the basis of that book by the Dalai Lama, Advice for Living and Advice for Dying and Living a Better Life, is this prayer by Panchen Chökyi Gyaltsen. And this is the third verse from that prayer. So it says, may we realize that there is no time to waste. Death being definite, but the time of it, so it's definite we're going to die, but the time of death, when we're going to die, is totally indefinite. What is gathered will separate. What has been accumulated will be consumed without residue, At the end of arising comes descent. The finality of birth is death. Yeah. So I guess I'd like to conclude just by saying here, I guess we have to take these two topics of lamrim together, the precious human rebirth and impermanence and death. Those really go together. Together, they become very powerful. Thinking about, as a human being, we're so fortunate to have not been born as a hell being or ghost or animal. We've been born as a human being. Just that is incredibly fortunate. Then within being a human being, we have healthy body, sound mind, access to education. We have enough prosperity that we don't have to worry about daily sustenance. Then within that, we have education. Within that, we have supportive parents, friends, live in a peaceful place. Within that, so many things to be fortunate for. Like within that, we have access to profound spiritual teachings, Buddhist teachings that can lead us to a good future rebirth, lead us to liberation from samsara, lead us to fully develop all of our positive potential as a person to become a fully enlightened being. And we have access to those teachings, and we have the freedom to practice them if we want. So thinking about all these things for which we're incredibly fortunate to have all of these opportunities. But it's like a window, it's like a small window of opportunity, right? It's not going to last. Inevitably, we're going to die. When we die, that's all gone. We might get it again, but we might not. So yeah, in next life, we might have the same opportunities again, but we might not. It's not sure at all. Kind of like roulette, no? So so yeah, that death is definitely going to happen. And when we die is not sure. We might think, oh yeah, but I'm only, like me, I'm only 48 now, so I'll definitely live till I'm 60 or 70 or so, but that's not sure at all, right? People die, our age, die every day. People younger than us die every day. It's not sure, like when we're going to die. So if we really treasure this opportunity, we need to make the most of it right now, right? Without waiting. So that's really, I think, the most probably powerful thing about this meditation on impermanence and death. When you conjoin it with thinking of all the good fortune that we have, all the opportunities we have in this life, and how that this life affords, and that won't be here forever. So we really need to think about, and it won't be here even for a certain amount of time in the future. There's no telling. So it really drives home the importance of thinking about what's really most meaningful in our lives, and acting on that, focusing on that, like right now, without wasting a moment. So then to go back to the original quote at the beginning, like the impermanence meditation and mindfulness of death is like following the tracks of the elephant in the forest. That's really, I think, the key is it really shows clearly what's most meaningful in life. It helps us to get clear about that, what's most meaningful in life, and act and follow that path. Right. Okay, so I've been speaking over an hour now. Didn't want to speak that long actually, but yeah, there's a few questions I can try to answer, and then yeah. Well, maybe, I don't know, should we take a little break, like a few minutes break? I think that'd be good. Yeah, just to kind of think about things, refresh a little bit, have a drink of water, stand up, whatever. Why don't we take a few minutes break, and then I'll take some questions, and then we'll do a little meditation, and then we can do some, have a discussion group. Okay, so let's say 3 minutes till 9. Well, it's on there, it's like, I'm not sure. Anyway, 3 minutes, you know what time it is. Okay. I like having a break, actually. It's the first time we ever did that. It's good, I think. Yeah, any questions or brief comments? I want to make sure we leave time for meditation and discussion group. So there will be discussion group too. Also, if there's questions you're happy just to discuss with the others in the course. But if there's any, I don't know, obvious pressing questions, now I can answer. No?
I have a question, please. And
Mhm.
it's a little bit tangential, maybe. I hope it's not too far afield. So, and feel free to say so if it is. But how is the concept of time how is it expressed outside of samsara? Does it exist the same as we know it, or like when you said that the birth existence and the and I guess also the death existence would be a momentary existence, whereas the bardo's a little bit longer, and what's the existence of this lifetime? What word did you?
Manifest existence.
Yeah, the manifest existence, that seems to be longer, but is that from a Buddha? Let's say you were an enlightened being, would you see it as being of different lengths, or is it not that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a difficult one, no? It's not, and it's not one that's described so much, so clearly in different texts. But I think, I mean, think about what time is. It's kind of a measure of change, right? It's because things change that we have a sense of time, movement of time. If nothing changed at all, like there wouldn't be time really. But I think it is kind of true. I mean, that you're sort of talking about, well, what's the difference between an ordinary sentient being? Time obviously exists for us, but for a Buddha, does time exist? And the other, it's a really interesting question, because a Buddha, well, in the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism, a Buddha is described as an omniscient being, right? They know everything, which means they know the three times, right? They know everything in the past, the present, and the future at once in the same moment. And of course, what that means is really difficult also. How can they know the future? Does that mean it's predestined? But so let's just imagine like every sentient being became enlightened. There are no sentient beings anymore. Everyone's a Buddha. Then
If other people lost volume, I can't hear you at all.
I don't know. Can you hear me? Other
I
people?
have volume.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I can hear
okay.
you.
Okay. Not sure who that was, but yeah.
Eh.
So if all sentient beings were enlightened, so this is something we debate about, but it's not really clear what happens. But would there be time? Would there be movement? I mean, I would assume like the physical world would still exist, right? So there would still be movement of physical things. As long as there's movement of physical things, there has to be time as well. I mean, that's my understanding. It's probably more Newtonian based. Like, I don't understand general relativity and stuff like that.
Can I follow up with a quick, is time considered to be just conventional, or is it more open-ended and not specified, as you're saying?
Gosh, I mean, in the two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth, it's a conventional truth, but that's not the same way you're using conventional.
Okay.
I think, is it conventional? You mean like, is it just relative to people, or is it something more fundamental than that?
I'm really not sure. I'm exploring that because I've thought about things like that. Like
Yeah.
if a Buddha can see a past life, is it because time is different?
Yeah. Time. Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a good thing to explore, and I don't really there's not like easy answers to those questions. So that's my easy answer. Yeah. Okay, other questions? Maybe a little easier. Christine?
Could you talk a little bit about what happens in the bardo?
Yeah. Okay, so in the bardo, basically well, we have to understand, like, bardo means between in Tibetan. Bar in Tibetan means between. So the bardo is an in-between state. So we have to, well, first of all, like, why is there even an in-between state? basically it's like this. Imagine, okay, we're a human now and we die, and imagine we're going to take rebirth as a human again. Well, we die in one place, say, I don't know, where are you? North Carolina?
I'm in Silicon Valley.
Okay, so say we die in Silicon Valley, but we're going to take rebirth in Sichuan province in China. We have to go, our consciousness has to go from Silicon Valley to Sichuan province, right? So there has to be, and we're not, what are we at that when we're going, right? We're not in the previous life because our continuum has been separated from the body. So we're not that person. And then we're not, are you still with me? I
Oh
can
yeah,
repeat
sorry.
if you-
Sorry, I had my daughter walk through the room, but no, I'm
I'm
still here.
sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, so the bardo is this between state, between the moment we die from one
Right.
life, rebirth, and the moment we take rebirth in the next rebirth. This is in between state. So like if we die in Silicon Valley and we take rebirth in Sichuan province, we have to physically go from one to the other. But it's not simple as just going from one place to another. That's part of it. It's also, we have to have karma with a certain set of parents, right?
Uh-huh.
It's not that we just have karma with everybody in the world that, for them to be our parents. When we die from one rebirth, we have to take rebirth to a set of parents with whom we have some kind of karmic connection, right? And who provide the kind of the set of conditions for our particular kind of karma to ripen, right? So we have to wait for those conditions to come together.
I see. So we're in the waiting room.
So it's like we're in a waiting room, waiting for a set of conditions that match our karma to come together, and then we enter them, and then take rebirth. So there's a lot of description, more detailed description about the bardo in different books. The best is, I think, there's a book called, I don't know. Actually, I don't remember. Maybe it's by Lati Rinpoche and I think Jeffrey Hopkins. Intermediate, I think it's birth, intermediate state, birth and death in Tibetan tradition or something. But yeah, basically a bardo. So a bardo being is it's kind of like a ghost body that's created by the power of the karma, which will throw our future rebirth. But it's in like a holding state, something like that.
That was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any last chance for questions? We'll meditate. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So, oh yeah, thank you. Mary Ellen just put that book in the chat. Death, Intermediate State, and Rebirth in Tibetan Buddhism. It's very technical, but it's very precise and a kind of detailed book. It has a detailed description of the bardo. But also in that book, the advice by the Dalai Lama, that's required reading for this. There's a good description there. Yeah, I meant to send out an email with required reading before this session. I didn't get to it. So before next session, I'll definitely send out one, kind of dividing up the required reading by, as it relates to the sessions. But like there's a lot of the required reading, especially in the PDF file, it's kind of goes here and there, and it's not really related to a specific, it doesn't follow the traditional outlines very closely. In the middle of that PDF file, there's one long teaching by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I have it here, actually. I'll share it with you. I wanted to show it to you. It's this one, Impermanence and Death by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. It's on page 71 of that PDF. So that one, I didn't read it yet, but just glancing through it, I think it follows quite closely the outlines that will follow through the sessions. So that's the one in that PDF file. That's the one I think I would focus on. The others I'll fill in the picture, different ways, but that one kind of has a good structure to it. And then that book by Dalai Lama, Advice for Dying and Living a Better Life, that one has the same structure will follow. And then the most clear structure is in Pabongko Rinpoche's Liberation on the Palm of Your Hand, because it has the very traditional lamrim outlines. So that has at the beginning, but all three of those, they have at the beginning advantages for reflecting on and disadvantages of not thinking about death. and then the 9-point death meditation, and then the kind of absorptions at the time of death. Roughly, they have those three. Okay, but now to meditate on, I think it's good to start, too often we get caught up in thinking about, all these definitions and outlines and stuff about death. But death is something we all have some experience with. Like, none of us have died yet from this life, but we all have maybe had brushes with it, being very sick, or, being in a situation like a car crash or a natural disaster. We were afraid of dying. And we've all had, I'm sure, people close to us die, our grandparents, maybe our parents or siblings or friends. So it's good to start with our own personal experience and just think about, in any topic we're meditating on, just first think about, well, what is that thing, right? So here, when meditating on death, just look at your own personal experience and just try to formulate in your own mind, by drawing on your experience, like, well, what is death? What does it mean? So that's the instruction. So let's just sit quietly for 10 minutes and think about that. What is death in terms of our own personal experience? And you're welcome to turn your video off, because it's kind of funny to sit meditating while people are like looking at you. Okay, let's stop there. And then let's do discussion groups, breakout rooms for discussion groups. So I think the questions to discuss, I don't know. I think you probably have enough to talk about with me suggesting questions. I think I didn't prepare any for today. What are some we could talk about? Yeah, what is death? What we were just meditating on. And then, yeah, how could it be helpful to think about death? What are some of the difficulties we might have, with thinking about it, like fears or, I don't know, things that, might be uncomfortable? What are some of the maybe benefits? Although we'll talk about that more next session. Yeah, I don't know. I think I trust you all will have enough to talk about. So what?
Do you want 3 people in a breakout room?
Yes, sounds good. And don't put me in a breakout room. After 5 minutes or so, I'll come around and visit each of the breakout rooms. Yeah, there was one question I'll just answer now that came up was, well, what do we do because I said, like, just meditate on what is death, meditate on death in general for the instruction. And like, some people were wondering, well, what are you supposed to do exactly? So yeah, anything, you do, you just ask the question, well, what is death? And then anything that you think about related to that question is fine, right? So whether you're, thinking about, I don't know, I was thinking a little bit about, like, well, the first person I was kind of majorly aware of died was my grandfather, or a father of a friend when I was really young. But just thinking about that experience, what as a child, seeing someone die, like what does that mean to you? How does that affect you? And then other people could think about the definition of death and, try to understand that, or think about, anything you think about related to it is fine. I think sometimes we get too fixated on the idea that when we're doing like analytical meditation, we need to think about these different outline points and we need to come to this kind of conclusion, but that's way too narrow. No, we need to feel like we have the freedom just to think about a question and the different ways of answering or addressing that question as it arises to our mind, to exploring with our mind. As long as we're thinking about something related to, like in this case, what is death? If it's related to that question in any way, it's fine, to think of that. And all that thinking will help sort of gradually fill in our picture, our idea of what death is. But there's a million ways to fill in that picture. Okay, so let's stop. Let's dedicate, and we'll continue next week. So Yeah, think about all the merit we've created, having begun the session with a positive motivation, right, with the intention to bring about somehow the well-being of ourselves and others, so we can rejoice, reflecting on some of the Buddhist teachings. Think about all the merit created by other people in the world, maybe especially people who work in hospice work, caring for the dead, or family members who I'm caring for the dying, and family, family members who are caring for their sick and loved and deceased ones, people who do prayers for those who've deceased. Think about all the people who, really selflessly work to benefit others in relation to the process of being sick, dying, having passed away. We can rejoice in all the merit they create. And then rejoice in all the merit created by other ordinary people like ourselves, and also Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and our spiritual teachers, holy beings everywhere. So by all the virtue of all this merit gathered together, may all sentient beings be free from every form of suffering and have every form of well-being and happiness up to full enlightenment. And may all of our own actions contribute to these. And especially those who are approaching death now, may they do so without fear. May they have a peaceful, calm, and clear mind. May they be able to forgive all the grudges, apologize, or be free from any resentment, any attachment, and die peacefully. And all those who have recently died, especially Eve's son, who died 49 days ago today, but all those who recently died or passing through the bardo, may they quickly take the best possible rebirth, precious human rebirth, or rebirth in a heaven or a pure land, where they can meet loved ones and meet spiritual teachings and wholesome companions that will help them progress on their spiritual path. And then any beings who've taken rebirth in an unfortunate rebirth, in a suffering condition, especially in lower realms, may they be immediately freed from that state, take a precious human rebirth or rebirth in a pure land, an upper realm, where they have all the conditions to progress towards enlightenment. And then finally, may we ourselves quickly generate deep insight into death, the dying process, and may this inspire us to strive in our own spiritual development and use that to benefit others. Okay, thank you all. And yeah, so during the intervening week, I'll send out a little worksheet with the definitions and stuff I covered today. And then also with some kind of trying to divide up the required readings between the sessions, stuff like that. So look for that in your inbox. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Venerable.
you.
you.
Thank you, Venerable Lexo,
Thank you, Venerable.
Much.
and Marianne and Mary Ellen and